of the ways we want to conduct this. We will not mind clapping and applause. We just don't want booing and rudeness. We want to make this a very civil night tonight. Isn't that right, my good friend, Lieutenant Hubbard? We want to keep everything very civil, right? That's right. Thank you very much. My name is Bill Dallas, and I am one of the co-sponsors of our organization. It's called Champion the Vote, where we encourage people to get out and vote. Because at the end of the day, after you hear from the 4 candidates here, and there's a 5th candidate that's not here, and you'll hear a little bit about that, you've got a decision this Saturday, and so we're going to encourage you to get out and vote. To that end, I'd like to show a video about our group, Champion the Vote.
When we take a look at the broad stripes and the bright stars on our American flag, we are reminded that our country has been through a perilous fight. When we take a look at the cross, we are reminded that our God sent His Son to die for us all. If you're a Christian and you're an American, you find yourself doing your best to honor both the cross and the flag. On November 6, 2012, we will have the opportunity to decide who runs our United States of America. It's estimated that there are over 60 million Christians in the U.S., and only about 30 million of them vote in any given election. That tells us that roughly half of the Christians in this country do not realize the power and influence they hold in one single vote. Do we really have an influence, you say? Well, let's take a look. For example, the Show Me State of Missouri. In 2008, the voting margin between the 2 main candidates was a mere 3,903 votes. Want to guess how many unregistered Christians reside in Missouri? Approximately 102,522. Let's head out east to the Tar Heel state of North Carolina. Their voting margin was only 14,177 votes. Unregistered Christians there, about 281,212. So here's the deal. We've researched 21 states and have concluded that getting 5 million new registered Christians would decide an election. So how will we get that many new people to vote? You. It all starts with YOU. And then we want you to use your influence in your community to champion other Christians to vote. It's a grassroots movement called Champion the Vote. It's your community. You have the influence. You are the champion. You are the movement. As a champion, you give us 1 hour a week, and we'll give you the tools that you will need to be successful. In that hour, you've got your options. You can send out emails and videos that we provide, make phone calls, take a walk and canvass your neighborhood, throw a small get-together, or hold a voter registration drive at your church. Again, with the tools that we provide online, we can measure your success as a champion, and you can see firsthand the difference that you've made. You don't have to be nervous about anything. You're simply using your influence in your community to make a difference, and we're here to help you do that effectively. Sign up at www.championthevote.com.
And if you would like to help get out the vote in South Carolina, you can do so by going to championthevote.com/South Carolina. All the tools are there. You sign up, you register, and you can help get out the vote for this Saturday. We also have tables out front where you can sign a card. We'll contact you. You can do it for this state. You can do it for other states. Again, we are very supportive of people getting out, registering, and voting. We have with us Orrin Smith. He's the president of the South Carolina Family Policy Council, who's going to come up and also talk to us about the power of the vote. Orrin, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good to be here. The video said it very well, perfectly. Said it politely. But the bad news is evangelical Christians elected Barack Obama. And that's just the bottom line. Either they've actually voted for the Democratic nominee or they stayed home at election time. So I'm here simply to encourage you. I know this is a very politically interested group, probably the most politically active group in Greenville County tonight. But I just wanted to encourage you on a few things. One, the polls are open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Saturday. If you're in line at 7 o'clock, you have to be permitted to vote. Second of all, you can still vote by absentee. If you don't want to mess with the lines, you can go until 5 o'clock Friday afternoon. South Carolina law, 5 o'clock Friday afternoon at the county voter registration office. And perhaps the most important issue is if you're not originally from South Carolina, we don't have party registration. You don't register by party. If you feel like a Republican, you're a Republican for purposes of the South Carolina Republican primary. So get out there, vote in the Republican primary. Let's turn this thing around and make a difference.
Warren, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
The lead sponsor of tonight's event is called Personhood USA. Many of you may not know about this organization. I'd like to run a video that'll tell you about Personhood USA.
I think it's one of the most important issues we face.
It affects everything.
Abortions,
cloning, euthanasia,
assisted suicide,
Stem cell research,
eugenics. When do we have value?
Who decides?
Is it influenced by age, race, or ability?
Who is a person?
Personhood. The recognition that all human life is precious, that every person has the right to life, from their earliest biological creation to natural death. Personhood is the new civil rights movement for the 21st century. It is the fulfillment of our potential as people and as a nation, and it is reinvigorating the culture of life in our society. These are the times that test men's souls. We must not shrink from our convictions. Before us lies the arduous road of the many battles to come, as we seek a federal constitutional amendment that protects all human life. You see, we've only just begun, but we know where we are going, and it starts with you. That's because Personhood is a true grassroots movement, and we need you to reach out to your community, your family, to your neighbors, and to your church. You are the invariable key to success in this movement. So please, take the first step and join us at personhoodusa.com. You can be the voice of change. You can be the voice of the voiceless.
It's not a day for us to hold back, not a day for us to hunker down. Today is the day for us to advance the message.
I'd now like to bring up the president of Personhood USA. Would you please join me in welcoming Keith Mason? Well, Keith, thank you so much for putting this whole thing on. You're hosting this historic event. Before we talk a little bit about the event itself, is there anything in this video that wasn't covered that we need to know about Personhood USA?
Yeah, I think the fundamental goal of Personhood USA is to say that all humans are persons. And if we're persons, we have values and we have rights. And so that's really the goal, is to build up and focus on the dignity of all humans, no matter of their size or their age. And I think that's the goal and the heart of our movement. And I'm so grateful for you all being here. So.
And on your website, you have a pledge. In fact, over 1 million people have signed that pledge. In fact, 4 of the candidates that are here tonight have all signed the pledge. Tell us about that pledge.
Yes, we are gathering people around the country that are like-minded. And so I would encourage all of you to go to Personhood USA and sign that pledge. We have some here at our table. But it's a pledge that says, I am not going to rest until every child is protected by love and by law. And you know what? All humans are persons. The child in the womb is a person like you and I and should have rights. Currently, our laws treat them like property. And so our organization and our movement is here to say that that shouldn't happen, and that's an injustice that we just can't tolerate.
And Speaker Gingrich, Senator Santorum, Congressman Paul, and Governor Perry have all signed that pledge. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Right. We're going to talk about it in a second when we bring up our moderators, but again, just so everybody understands, we've got 4 candidates here. One of them, Congressman Paul, was called back to D.C., that he needed to be back there for, I think, a vote, but we're going to bring him in via satellite. So the only candidate not here is Governor Romney, and some may ask why. Why is he not here?
Well, we didn't know until last night, but I did get a phone call from one of his state representatives saying that there was a conflict and he was not able to make it. But there was also a conflict in Iowa, and so we're actually hosting 2 of these events in Florida as well. So we're really looking forward to the governor joining us in those events to share his conviction there.
Okay, and just because level playing field, all the candidates were invited for tonight.
That is correct, and we want to hear equally from all the candidates. We're equal brokers here.
Just want to make sure, level playing field. With that said, I'm now going to turn it over to Keith, and you're going to go ahead and introduce our panel and then take it from there. So thanks again, Keith.
Thank you, Bill. Again, I am just so honored to be here with you folks tonight. This is a historic event. All the debates and the town halls have been good, but the issue of life has sort of been on the side. And so this town hall meeting is historic. Never before has there been a town hall meeting where so many of the candidates have participated to chime in and to share their convictions about human life and the dignity of human life. And I would say, again, this is an historic event because the most important issue in this race, in all of the races, is that of human life. If we don't get that right, nothing else matters. And so, again, I'm so grateful for you folks to be here, or being here. And on our panel today, we have some just really awesome folks. Lila Rose is founder and president of Live Action, and that's a grassroots organization that does investigative journalism to expose Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. And she runs the youth movement, the youth pro-life movement of America. Dan Becker, I'm honored to share a stage with him. He's president of Georgia Right to Life. He's a member of the National Right to Life Board, and he's also a member of my board at Personhood USA. And then we have a legal heavyweight, Gualberto Garcia Jones, is a legal analyst and sort of a heavyweight with what's happening with the personhood movement around America. So I'd like to ask you guys to welcome our panel to the stage.
And I am going to be acting as forum. One of the rules right at the beginning, we want to be respectful to the candidates, and that means no booing, no hissing, no throwing things. We do want so "20 minutes, beginning from the moment that they sit down. We have to keep this fair, equal, and balanced. They will be giving a 2-minute opening statement. The panel will ask questions, some of which have been pre-submitted by the audience. And the candidates will have a 60-second period in which to bring closing statements, and then we're going to usher them out and quickly bring on the next candidate. So I do want to state that Governor Romney has been invited and had a previous conflict and was unable to join us. Congressman Paul will be joining us via a live satellite from Washington, D.C., because he needed to be in Washington for a very important budget vote. So let's go ahead and get started. Rick Perry, the current governor of Texas, has held this office for 11 years. Please welcome Governor Rick Perry. He's slowly walking down the hallway.
Sir. Other than I got a big old dose of the, here, I'm put it in my pocket.
Let me welcome again Governor Rick Perry.
I feel you on that one. I mean, thank you. Thank you. Hey, Lila, how are you? Good to see you. Yes, sir, you again. Howdy. Thank you.
Governor Perry, would you begin with your opening comments, please, sir?
Well, no. First, I want to introduce somebody that's here. So I'm going to take a little personal privilege here and use a moment of time because we're here to talk about life. And a young man who has traveled with me over the course of the last couple of months, and he's left his home and his family and his 3 children, and he's got an incredible Christian witness. But more importantly, he is an Iraq war veteran who was hit by an IED back in '06, and he had 30 different surgeries and spent 2.5 years in Brooks Army Medical Center, and it's Dan Moran, Captain Dan Moran right there. I want him to stand up just a second. Thank you, brother. We fight for life on a lot of different battlefields, and I just wanted to recognize that young man for fighting for a lot of lives, and to say to all of you, thank you for the battlefield that you fight on. And as we all go forward, you know, our founding fathers had it right when they said that we were endowed by a Creator, and life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness were going to be very important in this country. And when it comes to protecting innocent life, that is a constitutional right. That's not just an ideal. That is a constitutional right. You know, there are a lot of people that talk about it, but I'm very proud to have been on the front line of that, and not just talking about it, but making a difference. I'm not 1 out of 100. I'm not 1 out of 435. I'm 1 out of 1 in the second most populous state in the nation. I make life and death decisions on a regular basis. And when legislation has come to my desk, I've had the opportunity to protect life in my home state. It's been with great pride and joy that I've been able to do it, whether it's passing legislation, a lot of that was to give parental consent, legislation that I signed on informed consent, legislation that this last session requires an individual, a woman who's about to get an abortion, to see a sonogram of that child in her. It's not just a lump of tissue. It's a living human being. Those are just some of the things that we've done, but in particular, I was really proud to be able to sign legislation that we worked with our legislature to defund Planned Parenthood in the state of Texas. There are 12 abortion clinics that aren't open in the state of Texas today because our members of the legislature had the courage, the wisdom to do that. So thank you all for what you make a difference.
Thank you, Governor Perry, for those opening comments. We want to keep this colloquial and conversational, but we do have some substantive questions that we would like to put to you and get your thoughts on. Beginning with the first question. In the 21st century, there is no longer a question as to when human life begins. Supreme Court may not have known that in 1973, but today there is no question that science has established that genetically we are human from our earliest biological beginning. The question that I have is a legal one. When are we a person with rights under the law?
I would suggest to you it starts at conception. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I do have a pretty substantial amount of common sense. And common sense tells us that those don't always go hand in hand. I know that. But
conception being defined as?
When the sperm and the egg come together and pretty much you got a different idea?
We're going to be exploring that a little later.
I'm not a doctor either, but again, I did grow up on the farm.
Governor Perry, how would you take that definition of human life, and how would you interpret our Constitution to ensure that those unborn children are protected under our Constitution?
Well, it's not me to interpret the Constitution. The Constitution is written, and the Constitution is what it says it is. And we need to put strict constructionists on the Supreme Court that will not try to interpret the Constitution to mean something else. And when the issue of when the issue of abortion or the issue of conception comes up in a legal sense, that it is appropriately dealt with, and that someone is not, reading between the lines. I mean, the fact of the matter is that I have read through the Constitution many times, and matter of fact, I want to say thanks to all the Tea Party people that are in here. The Tea Party probably had more to do with Americans picking up a copy of the Constitution and reading it over the course of the last 3 years than maybe over the last 50 years combined. So thank you for what you've done if you're in the Tea Party.
Governor, how would you find protection for the unborn child in the Constitution? How would it be used to protect the unborn child?
Well, obviously, if the issue is that at conception you are a person, then all of the protections that you have outside of the womb are as real and as definable as those inside of the womb. So, I mean, from my perspective, it is pretty simple. And in my state, we pass legislation that protects the child in the womb from certain acts of in our legislature.
Transitioning here, Planned Parenthood, as you mentioned earlier, in its latest annual report, said that it performed in the last year alone over 300,000 abortions and received almost $500 million from the government. As president, how would you support legislation to end this funding, and how would you communicate your support of that legislation to the public?
Well, not unlike what we've done in the state of Texas. I mean, you need to be vocal about it. You need to tell the legislatures, if you send me a piece of legislation, if you send me a bill that has appropriations that can be used for abortions, it'll be vetoed. It's that straight up. You need to be that straightforward with it. And I think I'm good on my word on that one, because not only from the defunding side of Planned Parenthood that we did in the state of Texas, but I look at that as one of those that's it's very clear. There's no gray area. Don't send me a piece of legislation that has funding that can be used for abortions. It'll be vetoed, period.
Last year, the House of Representatives passed a bill defunding Planned Parenthood, and then it wasn't able to get through. How far, as president, would you push the Congress? Would you be willing to do something basically that the Democrats could then spin to say that you're blocking the function of government by vetoing or holding up?
I'm not sure I understand your question that well. The point is, if you're going to be pro-life, then you need to be pro-life all the way. You need to, I've been around this business long enough to understand the horse trading that goes on and what have you. But there's some principles that you don't trade on, and life is one of them. So the issue there is that this is what I need, and I'm not sure I get the veto side of that statement that you talked about.
Basically, you said you would veto something if it included funding for Planned Parenthood.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
Right. If they tied that into, say, other vital programs.
I would veto the bill, and then it would go back, and then they catch on after 2 or 3 times. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that part of it.
Thank
I apologize.
On Monday, Governor Huntsman dropped out of the race, and this leaves Governor Romney as the only candidate that has declined to sign the Personhood Pledge, or any other pledge for that matter. For full disclosure, we mentioned that Governor Romney was invited to this event and declined. But how would you except for the pledge, how would you differentiate your record and Governor Romney's record on life?
You don't have enough time in here. I mean, seriously. I mean, Governor Romney's been on both sides of the issue of life, and you know, I've heard his remarks before from the standpoint of. My son and I were actually having this conversation. What, Griffin? 6 weeks ago. How do you change your position on the issue of either you're pro-abortion and then you change over to pro-life in your 50s? I mean, I will tell you that from my perspective, if this was something that occurred in maybe in your younger years and you had time to really think this through and you matured as an individual, and you know at 25 or 30 years old you said, you know, I understand now that as a youth I did not have the wisdom nor the experience to understand this issue well enough, and therefore I am going to change my position to pro-life. But in your 50s, you know, it is clear to most of us that this was a choice for convenience. This was a decision that Governor Romney made for a political convenience, not an issue of his heart.
Thank you. Governor Perry, in the tragic case of a woman who conceives a child through rape and incest, we believe that the best solution is to provide loving support to the mother and the child, and not to abort the child for the crime of her father. Right. In our Iowa forum, I was touched by the sincerity of your answer, because you have changed your position on this recently.
I have strengthened my position on life. I've always been a very pro-life legislator and lieutenant governor and governor. And I did have the exceptions for rape and incest historically. And sitting down with an individual who, Rebecca Kessling, who was a product of rape. And we had a long and a heartfelt conversation. And she looked me in the eye and she said, "Governor, are you telling me that?" She said, "I understand your concern about the issue and having an exception for rape and for incest." But she said, "Are you telling me that my life is not just as important?" And I didn't have an answer for her. And she touched my heart in a way that at that particular point in time, I realized that if you're going to be pro-life, you got to be pro-life. You can't be partly pro-life.
Governor Perry, as the governor of Texas, you've made a strong case for states' rights as a safeguard of traditional values against federal intrusion. In your book, titled Fed Up, you offer a plan for saving America from Washington. How would you apply some of those concepts to the fight for life?
Yeah. When we have a president that appoints 2 or 3 more Supreme Court justices, which the next president of the United States is liable to do, those, from my perspective, should be individuals who are strict constructionists, who look at the Supreme Court, or I should say look at the Constitution and interpret it in the way that our founding fathers wrote it and meant for it to be interpreted, which is straight up that it's not a living document. It is what it is, and it says what it says. Therefore, Roe versus Wade would be overturned. And until the United States of America could pass an amendment to our Constitution that protected all life, the states would have the authority to regulate that issue and protect life in their states until we passed a constitutional amendment, which I am certainly in favor of and would help promote across this country. So it's a two-step process. Finding Roe versus Wade unconstitutional, then it would flow back to the states until we passed a constitutional amendment nationally which clearly put into our Constitution that life is protected from conception until natural death.
Personhood USA has numerous state personhood amendments where we're trying to amend the state constitutions to protect life under the state constitution. Right now, we're actually, this week, we're being sued by Planned Parenthood in Ohio, in Nevada, and in Colorado to prevent us from even...
Congratulations.
Thank you. We wear it as a badge of honor. Would you support that type of state legislation if it came to Texas? I know you don't have the initiative process,
Yeah.
but...
My hope is I'm not there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. But as a president, you'd have a pretty good bully
No,
pulpit.
Look, even from the bully pulpit of the presidency, a president can have an impact in the states. I mean, I've talked about my interest in passing a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. I've talked about a constitutional amendment that makes Washington Congress part-time, and certainly going into a state using the bully pulpit of the presidency or as the governor of that state. In this case, I absolutely would support that. And, you know, obviously, want to see the legislation. That's always a good caveat, just to tell you, yeah. And but you know my history. You know my historical positions on parental consent, informed consent, sonogram bill, defunding Planned Parenthood. It is not problematic for me at all to put into the Texas Constitution an amendment that would protect our life from conception to and define person.
One more quick question.
Great.
Governor, this is a question from a woman in the audience who's named Judy. She's a registered nurse.
Great.
And she asks you, I've been a registered nurse since the early 70s. During the first years that abortions were made legal, I was not required to participate if I chose not to. Should this choice be given to healthcare workers today and in the future with no fear of job loss or employment repercussions?
Yeah, I'm married to an RN, so absolutely that the idea that anyone should be forced by the federal government to perform a procedure that is against their conscience should not be.
I think we lost, there we go. Governor, would you extend that protection to hospitals that are faith-based?
Here's one of the issues that this administration is, I've made the statement that this administration is in a war against religion. And, you know, there's been some people on the left that got all twisted up about that. And I tell them, I said, listen, it's true. The Justice Department took the issue of ministerial exception all the way to the United States Supreme Court. I'll tell you how liberal Obama is. He's so liberal that even Justice Ginsburg didn't agree with him on this. I mean, there was a unanimous decision that the ministerial alliance or ministerial exception should stay in place. And when you look at their refusal to defend the Defense of Marriage Act and their refusal to allow Catholic charities to receive Health and Human Services money to help sexually trafficked individuals. I mean, this is a great service that Catholic Charities is involved with. And they would not let that money go forward because they disagree with the Catholic position of being pro-life and anti-abortion. So if that's not a war on religion, I don't know what it is. So obviously, whether you are a professional in that hospital or you're the hospital itself, you should be protected from any type of wrongful discharge suits or what have you that come from that position.
Perry.
Great, sorry.
We have 60 seconds. What would you like to say in closing remarks?
60 seconds, that sounds like a debate. Listen, I want to just wrap up with not everyone's born into ideal conditions. And I think that's the real root of what we talk about when we talk about protecting life. And for some that would say, well, you know, this child came here because of rape or incest, or this child has got a malady that's going to make it be hard to take care of or what have you, and all of those arguments that get made about life. I think about Moses. Moses wasn't born into ideal circumstances when you think about it. Pharaoh was killing all the Hebrew males, and his mother hid him in the reeds and in that river. And I think it's one of the more humorous stories in the Bible also that Pharaoh's daughter is who found him and took him as her own, and he got to live his life on Pharaoh's credit card. But the point is that you look back in history and all of the incredible men and women who have impacted this world, who, if they were born today, think about 35,000 children every day are aborted in China. That country is destined for the ash heap of history unless it changes its values. And America needs to also look at it so. When we have now had over 50 million since abortion became illegal in this country. So what you do is so important. And I salute you. I'm just proud to be a foot soldier in your army.
Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you, man. Appreciate you. Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Godspeed. Cap.
Newt Gingrich, as a U.S. representative from my great state of Georgia, served for 20 years in the United States House of Representatives and served as Speaker of the House of Representatives from 1995 to 1999. Please welcome Speaker Newt Gingrich. I think he's shaking hands out in the hallway right now. Quite frankly, I've never been at a political gathering where we've had difficulty getting the candidates on stage. Bear with us a moment. Again, Speaker Newt Gingrich.
Hi, guys. Wow.
We have
very impressive.
Very informal crowd here, and we'd like to just turn it over to you. What would you like to say? 2 minutes, and then we'll get into some substantive questions.
Well, I think we're at one of the great turning points in the debate which has been growing for the last 40 or 50 years. We've seen a secular judiciary seek to impose elite values in a country that deeply dislikes it. We have a paper at newt.org that's 54 pages long on rebalancing the judiciary across the board, because it's many different issues. In addition, we have a paper we just posted on creating a commission on religious liberty, because we, the American people, have tolerated our elites in the classroom, in the news media, in the bureaucracy, and in the judgeships, increasingly driving us towards a secular society that has no relationship to American history and no relationship to American civilization. And my sense is that we're right at the edge of a huge counterattack. The Right to Life movement has been gaining ground every decade. More and more people, as they think about it, have concluded that life begins at conception. We are in a position now starting to have a serious conversation about what does that mean? What are the implications? Planned Parenthood has gone from a totally good thing 30 years ago that nobody talked about to an institution of enormous controversy, the largest abortion provider in the United States. So I think there are actually encouraging signals that with aggressive, articulate leadership, we could have a cultural revival of enormous proportions and in a relatively short time fundamentally reset our elite institutions to reflect American values rather than trying to impose on us alien values.
Thank you. Speaker Gingrich, it's been said that the 19th century was the industrial age, the 20th century was the nuclear age. I believe that the 21st century we're destined to be known as the biotech age. We believe that there are two seminal questions that will guide us into the 21st century. When are we fully human, and when do rights attach to us as a person?
We are fully human upon conception because all of the genetic patterns needed are in existence at that moment, and therefore the rights should attach at that moment, which would mean that we have to find a mechanism to define personhood as beginning at conception and then to communicate the implications of that.
Do you have a suggestion for that mechanism?
Well, I'm very fond of Robbie George's proposal at Princeton that we use the 14th Amendment provision that Congress can define personhood, and that if we were to pass a bill that defined personhood as beginning at conception, and then attach to the bill a provision that it not be reviewable by the court, that it would set up an appropriate conversation about what we do next.
Since you were a congressman from Georgia, I have been following your career for 20 years, and I've always appreciated the future-oriented tack that you have taken in your approach to public policy questions. Recent issues from Foreign Policy magazine and Wired magazine have had on their front covers the most dangerous ideas in the world. They're dealing with and they're speaking of transhumanism and human genetic engineering, and have labeled them as the greatest challenge we will face in the 21st century. Science fiction, loopy fringe, or are these substantive policy issues that we should be talking about in the public square?
No, these are at the heart of the next 40 years. I mean, and we need to understand, somewhere on this planet, there will be a dictatorship that uses science in ways that are truly grotesque. And you're going to end up, for example, making decisions like, can someone participate in the Olympics who is genetically engineered? I mean, you're going to have, you have an array of different countries out there, some of which have values so radically alien to us that you're going to have these kind of things. And I think this may be the first time in some ways since leaving the Garden of Eden where we have to come back and address the question of what does it mean to be human. And I think it's also a time to be very aware of the fact that the greatest of all sins is hubris, putting yourself in front of God, and that there's a really great danger of those scientists and those technicians who believe that they now have God-like powers because it defies the very essence of humanness, which is to be within life, not above life.
Speaker Gingrich, this past year we saw an unprecedented bipartisan majority vote in the House of Representatives to defund the nation's biggest abortion chain, Planned Parenthood. That effort was ultimately blocked by the Senate and by the President. However, as Speaker of the House, many believe that you lost your position because you were willing to, as some say, shut down the government before violating the contract with America. How far would you push your veto powers as president in order to defund abortion providers such as Planned Parenthood?
Well, let me start with the assertion, we closed the government down in the fall of 1995. I left the speakership at the end of 1998. I was reelected speaker in between. The Republicans, for the first time since 1928, kept control of the House. I would argue that our courage and our willingness to confront Clinton head on actually got us reelected for the first time since 1928. Nobody in the Washington news media wants to answer the question, how come for the first time in 68 years they won if shutting down the government was that bad a thing? Because in Washington, everybody assumes that shutting down the government's terrible, and in the rest of the country, they think, well, you know, some days it might be a good idea. So I think you have to start there. Second, we had a huge disadvantage, which I would not have as president. The President of the United States, any President of the United States, has an enormous public relations advantage over the Congress. Because you have one president surrounded by a staff with the prestige of the White House. You have 535 members of Congress, so it's much harder to communicate. As president, I would want to pick my fights carefully. I would want to make sure that the American people thoroughly understood them.
Is this a fight that you would pick?
Well,
would Planned Parenthood be a fight you'd pick?
Well, I mean, Planned Parenthood's easy. I mean, look, if you go anywhere in America and you say, I want to defund Planned Parenthood and take all of that money and put it into a fund for adoption so young women can choose life over death, you overwhelmingly, you know, we will defund Planned Parenthood sometime early in 2013, because the morning you have a president who's willing to make the case, Planned Parenthood is hopeless at trying to defend itself. It is the largest abortion provider in the United States, period.
Speaker Gingrich, while he was governor of Massachusetts, Governor Romney signed 189 homosexual marriage licenses. He has defended this action by stating that the Massachusetts Supreme Court issued a ruling obligating him to do so. This brings up the question of how an executive, whether of a state or a federal government, can challenge a constitutional ruling when they believe it is clearly erroneous and in contravention to the executive's oath of office. So if elected president, how would you deal with the enforcement of Supreme Court policy and precedent that violates your oath of office as you see it?
Well, let me say, if I can take a detour for a second. You know, Governor Romney also, after having become pro-life, passed Romney Care with tax-paid abortion, wrote Planned Parenthood into Romney Care, but no right to life group. His administration approved paying for an abortion clinic for Planned Parenthood with state funds, and he appointed pro-abortion and pro-gay marriage judges to the court. So in terms of who's likely to change Washington, I would say his track record is not only not change, it's in the opposite direction. The paper that Vince Haley and I developed on the courts, which we've developed over a 9-year period, the Founding Fathers wanted 3 co-equal branches of government. They developed this out of Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws, and the idea was to have a balance of power. The legislative branch came first in the Constitution because it's the largest, the closest to the people, the most frequently elected. The executive branch came second because the president's job is to execute the law. That's why it's called executive. The courts actually came third, and in the judgment of the Founding Fathers, it was to be the weakest branch. Alexander Hamilton says this explicitly in the Federalist Papers. Years ago, I did a study of the Revolutionary War generation. Their number 1 demand was no taxation without representation. Their number 2 demand was to control the British judges, because they regarded the judges as dictatorial imposition by the crown. And we tend to forget this. No American law school teaches this, because American law schools aggrandize lawyers and judges. But in fact, the Founding Fathers were deeply hostile to the British judges. Hamilton says in the Federalist Papers, the judicial branch will never pick a fight with the 2 elected branches, because as the weakest branch, it would inevitably lose. And we don't have time tonight, but if you go look at the paper, we cite Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I mean, there's zero question about this. The Warren Court in 1958 asserts that the Supreme Court is the final word on the Constitution. And of course, every law school loves it. Makes lawyers more important. They're at the center. The correct answer is baloney. The president interprets the Constitution as president. Every member of Congress swears to uphold the Constitution. which they have to uphold as legislators. And the court swears to uphold the Constitution. If the court makes a fundamentally wrong decision, the president can in fact ignore it. Lincoln does with Dred Scott. The Congress can abolish the courts. Jefferson abolished 18 out of 35 federal judges. Literally, they were gone. They tried filing suit claiming it was unconstitutional. The remaining 17 judges said, we're not going to take the suit. Jefferson would abolish our court if we agreed to hear your suit. So I think, I just want to make one closing point. This is not something you would do capriciously. It's not something you do on small issues. But I fully expect as president that there will be several occasions when we will collide. And I'll tell you the first one, which is actually foreign policy, the Boumediene decision, which extends American legal rights to enemy combatants on a battlefield, is such an outrageous extension of the court into the commander-in-chief's world. This is Washington's commander-in-chief flag from Valley Forge. I will issue an instruction on the opening day, the first day I'm sworn in, I will issue an executive order to the national security apparatus that it will not enforce Boumediene, and it will regard it as null and void because it is an absurd extension of the Supreme Court into the commander-in-chief's responsibility to defend America.
To play devil's advocate, I think the opposition would say that you are basically substituting tyranny by 5 Supreme Court justices with the possibility of tyranny from one chief executive. How would you respond to that?
Well, it's very straightforward. The Constitution's designed so it's always 2 out of 3. If the court and the Congress take on the president, the Congress can cut off funding, and the president loses the ability to do anything. If the Congress and the president take on the court, they can literally abolish one. So it's always a floating which 3. If the president and the Congress and the court are on the same side, the president can veto things, and the Congress would have to have an enormous majority. So I think, but this is literally the design of Montesquieu, this idea of this balance of the 3 as the best way to protect us. Lincoln says in his first inaugural, if the court has the ability to decide the law for the entire country, then 5 people can dictate and the American people's freedom will be gone. That's how strongly he felt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One quick question, and then I'll let you segue directly into your closing comments. On behalf of Georgia Right to Life, I'm delighted that you've signed the Personhood Pledge. It limits abortion to cases when the mother's life is in danger, and only as long as every effort is made to save both the mother and the child. Could you share with the audience the reason for your recent conversion to this position?
Well, it's not a recent conversion to that position. The Hyde Amendment, which has always included exceptions for rape and incest, except one time. But Henry Hyde was probably the greatest elected advocate of right to life that we had for a generation. Knew he could pass an amendment to block any tax-paid funding if he included those exceptions. And he literally couldn't pass it otherwise. And so there's a Catholic doctrine that if you can save the majority, then you do it even though it's not perfect. And I think Henry, as a good Catholic, was operating within that. I was with Henry in 84 on the platform committee when we adopted no exceptions on the Republican platform because we had the votes to do it.
But your personal position at the current time is that you don't...
My position is life begins at conception, and that imposes hard choices because you now have every single person is a person from conception. I really want to tell you in terms of my own evolution, because this was not, when I was a college professor, this was not an issue that was a burning issue to me. My bias was anti-abortion, but it wasn't, and as I became a member of Congress and I talked it through and I became more and more pro-life. The decisive moment, I was at a brunch one morning in Buckhead on a Sunday, and this woman walks up to me, and she says, I just hate your right to life position. I said, well, I'm here having brunch, and, she said, no, I really want to talk to you. She said, I want you to understand. That is my body. And I said, well, she said, no. As far as I am concerned, it is just a malignant tumor. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, let me get this straight. Baby, malignant tumor. Got it. And from that point on, the gap between those who think this is not life and those who understand the preciousness of life is so wide that it's been very easy and comfortable for me to say, I got it, you know. We're going to have an argument about whether or not it's life. If it is life, we're then going to have an argument about how you live that out and how you legislate it out. But I have zero doubt that when a woman becomes pregnant, it is not a malignant tumor, it is a baby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. 30 seconds. Thank you. Great to see you again. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
We'd like to take a moment and make some special recognition of some of the legislators that we have with us tonight, and would like to acknowledge State Senator Lee Bright, who sponsored Personhood USA bill in South Carolina. Senator Bright. Also with us tonight is the sponsor of the Personhood bill in the Georgia Senate, Senator Barry Loudermilk. Thank you. Rick Santorum served as a U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania from 1994 to 2006. Please welcome Senator Rick Santorum. It is a very long hallway out there. Senator Rick Santorum, thank you.
Got to put a microphone on. Hello, good to see you. Good to see you again. How are you? Thanks for coming. My pleasure, thank you. Got to put a microphone on me, I'm sorry about that.
Senator Santorum, what would you like to say to the good people of South Carolina?
Well, first let me thank you for all being here and standing up for life. That's something that, as you know, is very much at the heart of my political career and something that I have stood for and fought for on a national stage. I always say that it's one thing to check the box and say you're for life. It's another thing to go out and stick your head out of the foxhole and lead the charge to make sure that people in this country respect and understand the dignity of every human life. I think we give up too much, and others have in this campaign, by saying they believe life begins at conception. I don't believe life begins at conception. I know life begins at conception. And so we need to make sure that we have someone who is unabashedly, not just pro-life, but unabashedly a fighter for life. And if you look at the track record of everybody in this race, and you look at mine, you look at the conditions that I had to fight in and the places I had to go and win and get elected, they're exactly the places we have to go and get elected and win if we're going to win the presidency. And I've done that, standing strong and tall and fighting for human life. And I'll continue to do that in this campaign, as I have throughout the course of this campaign, and I will not just talk about it in a Republican primary. This is an indispensable moral issue of our time, and it's something that we will continue to fight on and talk about and lead on in the general election and after the general election when we lead this country.
Thank you. Senator Santorum, over a decade ago, 2001, PBS, on their acclaimed program Nova, aired a documentary entitled 18 Ways to Make a Baby. If you search for that episode on their website today, the postscript states that there are now 31 unique ways to create a human life. Given the increasing power to reshape and control our very identity as humans, we believe that having a clear and concise policy that defines and protects human beings is critical. Senator Santorum, when do you believe that we become a person with full legal protection under the law?
I said it before. The fact is that life begins at the moment of conception. That is a biological fact. At the moment of conception, we have a unique individual, a unique human being, genetically human and metabolizing and therefore alive. And so we have a human life at that point. And the debate is not about when life begins or what is a human life. The debate is when do the rights under the Constitution as being a person attached to that human life. And I think from our founders' vision and certainly based on the principles of our founding documents of our country, we should respect life at the moment life begins. And that's what our Constitution, I believe, and our founders intended. That's what the words of the Constitution say, that a person is a human being. Every human being should be a person, and every person is a human being.
As a follow-up question to that, in May 2008, Cornell University crossed a human embryo, a child, with the fluorescent gene of an Australian jellyfish, creating the world's first glow-in-the-dark human. When challenged on the ethics, the National Institute of Health said that the Cornell work would not be classified as gene therapy in need of federal review because a test tube embryo is not considered a person under the regulations. As president, how would you advance scientific knowledge while protecting human dignity and human life?
Science is not an ethics-free or moral-free zone. It is something that society has every right and, in fact, an obligation to curb. We saw that. We saw that in this country when it came to what experiments were being done on the disabled, were being done on the mentally disabled, and society said, no, we can't do that. We can't do that to some in our society. Science will go, unfortunately many in science, will go wherever they want to go because they don't feel any moral constraints, and it is our obligation as a society to protect innocent human life and not allow it to be experimented upon for any reason. And therefore, that's why I opposed embryonic stem cell research, not just funding, but opposed any creation of embryonic stem cell research. This is an area where we cannot and should not go. It is an area that we do not need to go, but even if we needed to go there, we are what we allow our society to do. And if we allow our society to prey upon innocent human life, we are complicit with it, and it affects us, and it undermines the dignity of each and every one of us.
Senator Santorum, pro-lifers, like most Americans, recognize that strong and healthy families are necessary to raise the next generation of strong and healthy citizens. In fact, you've written a book, It Takes a Family. Planned Parenthood and their like-minded allies and their founder, Margaret Sanger, has a slightly different view of family, advocating reducing family size through abortion, advocating what's known as eugenics. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said to the New York Times recently, "Frankly, I had thought that at the time Roe was decided, There was concern about population growth, and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of. As president, how would you combat the agenda of groups like Planned Parenthood, this ideology that want to control and limit certain undesirable populations?
As you just mentioned, Lila, this is the heart of Planned Parenthood comes from the eugenics movement. That's what Margaret Sanger believed in. She believed that in inferior races, she believed in people that were, quote, undesirables. And to hear a United States Supreme Court justice echo those sentiments should send chills down everybody's spine. To have a United States Supreme Court justice say, well, yeah, of course that's what abortion was about. We had undesirables in our country, people that shouldn't be having children. Ladies and gentlemen, every child has dignity and value. I'm the blessed father of a special needs child, which is the greatest gift that I've ever been given in my life. To understand and see human life through the eyes of our little girl has changed me, changed my wife, changed everybody that comes in touch. I know if you talk to people who deal with special needs children, they don't see them as disabled. They see us as the one who are disabled, who are not so free and willing to love and to see life in a way that they do. No, we have to have a society that values every human life, and when we see organizations out there that deliberately try, and they do, to try to undermine the dignity of human life and undermine the value of some in society over others, that is a path we cannot and should not take.
What are some actions? What are some actions that you would take, Senator, in order to combat the actions of groups like Planned Parenthood that are making that a reality in our country?
Well, it certainly would defund Planned Parenthood. That would be the easiest thing to do. And I'll say it right now, I will not sign any appropriation bill that has any funding for Planned Parenthood or anybody that, as you see, sees the world in the way they do. It is not an appropriate role for the federal government to be playing to undermine the dignity and value of every human life.
Just a quick follow-up. There has been critique from some pro-lifers as to your vote for Title X funding, and you've explained it that it was because it was part of this larger bill, and you need government to keep running. However, you also just said right now that you would not sign legislation that included funding. So where do you draw the line?
Well, I draw the line at Planned Parenthood as number one. And look, when you're a United States Senator, it's, as you know, I was one of the folks who started Title 20 funding, which was actually funding for programs that allowed for abstinence education. I started funding and worked for fatherhood initiatives, for healthy marriages, for a whole host of programs because, candidly, we had no ability to defeat the Title X funding. So I could have, I guess, voted against an appropriation bill because there was that one particular provision in it. But what I sought to do was actually try to find, and did find, alternatives to Title X funding that were consistent with the values that I believed in. And in that same bill that funded Title X, also funded Title 20, healthy marriage programs, and a host of other programs that were oriented toward those values. So you could have made the statement, had I voted against the bill, well, you voted against abstinence programs. So there are good things and bad things in large appropriation bills. I think you'll find a very clear record of someone who fought vehemently against all of those things, and in fact introduced into those same bills something that wasn't there before I came, which are programs that promoted abstinence and healthy marriages.
Senator Santorum, Governor Romney crafted a government-run healthcare system which included $50 copay abortions and which served ultimately as a model for Obamacare. If elected president, would you lead the charge to repeal Obamacare, and how would you go about doing that and communicating that to the American
I wouldn't
public?
be in this race if it wasn't for Obamacare. Part of the reason is that little girl I talked to you about earlier, and what a healthcare system that would value only the utility of human life, which ultimately every socialized medicine statute in the world has done. But Obamacare is a game changer for this country. It makes every single American dependent upon the federal government for your health and your life. And once we are dependent upon government, freedom as we know it in America is over, because the government has you. And they... I talked about my grandfather coming to this country and coming here because he wanted to be free. And I wasn't going to let in one generation that freedom slip away. And so I am here. You have my assurance that we will repeal Obamacare. You just have to do really one thing. Give me 3 Republican United States senators at least. There are 33 up. 23 of the 33 are Democrats. So we got a big field to be able to pick up 3 seats, hopefully 13 seats, which would give us 60 votes. But if you give us at least 3, then we can use the process. You can't do it by a waiver. You can't do it by executive orders, if some have suggested. You've got to do it by gutting it, and the way you gut it is through the reconciliation process, passing a budget that will allow for a bill to come through with 50 votes only needed in the Senate, and we will strip out every dollar of spending, every dollar of taxes, every fine, every fee. So the statute will still be there. It just won't be enforceable because there'll be no money and there'll be no penalties if you don't abide by the law. So we will gut it, and once we gut it, then we'll sweep the rest of it away subsequent to that.
Senator Santorum, what can you do without the action of Congress that would save the most lives?
Well, I actually put out a whole laundry list of things that you could do via executive order. Obviously, the Mexico City policy and the Hyde Amendment, and which obviously you need government to do, the Congress to help with that. But the imposition, for example, of the gag rule, that's something that Ronald Reagan put in place, Bill Clinton overturned, and George Bush did not reinstate it, which is that you can't refer for abortions with any kind of federal funds. And that is something that I would immediately on day one put back in place to make sure that federal dollars don't go for that purpose. There are other things that we will do, and again, allocating resources and funds away from things that undermine human life, and obviously putting a ban on embryonic stem cell, federal funding for embryonic stem cell research. And there are a lot of things you can do by executive order, but the big things is to make sure that you fight the courts, and you fight, but not just through executive order, but fight the courts in their understanding of what their role is in our country. And I have a long laundry list of things that we put forward, including reconstituting and redoing the Ninth Circuit. We need to send a message to the courts that as President of the United States, just like as Congress, we have a right to uphold, we have an obligation to uphold the Constitution, and we have every much a say as what the Constitution means as they do, and we have a right and we have an obligation to fight them when they get it wrong.
A quick closing question. In recent years, we've seen over 1 million children aborted every year in our country. What do you see as the major human rights issues of our day, and how does the dehumanization of the unborn rank among them?
Well, you go back to the Declaration of Independence and what makes this country the greatest country in the history of the world. It's because we were the first and only country ever to recognize that rights come to us from our Creator, and that those rights are given to us equally, and they are given to all of God's creatures. And the first among those rights recognized in the Declaration of Independence was the right to life. Why? Because liberty and happiness are impossible without being alive. And so unless we hold up and value that basic right, then all the other rights are tainted. All the other rights are tainted if we, in fact, don't have and give every human the opportunity to draw that first breath. And I really do believe that it tells a lot about a society as to how welcoming we are to all human life. And so I would just say that you will see a President Santorum out there on the front lines doing what I had to do at now a couple of the debates. I was asked this question at the debate, I think it was here in South Carolina, whether I was too extreme on the issue of abortion. that I have no exceptions for rape and incest. When I was asked that question, I responded that several years ago, the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling that said that a rapist, someone who was convicted of the crime of rape, could not be executed because it would be cruel and unusual punishment. Yet, the child in the womb who was conceived as a result of that rape could be executed, and it would not be cruel and unusual punishment. That is a society that has its morals upside down. That is a society where leaders have to go out and lead and educate. We don't talk about abortion. We hide it. Most presidential candidates who are pro-life rarely talk about it, only on, January 23rd, when they do the March for Life, and then it's just hidden. We need someone who every day goes out and reminds us who we are, reminds us who we can and should be, and who God intended this country to be like.
Thank you, Senator Santorum. If I can direct your attention to the screen behind us, which I couldn't see. Representative Ron Paul was elected as a U.S. representative from the state of Texas in 1996 and currently holds that office. Please welcome Representative Ron Paul. Representative Paul, please open with 2 minutes worth of opening statements. Tell the people why you're here tonight, or there.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm not quite there with you, but I'm in D.C. because I was anxious to come up here and vote against that debt increase that $1.2 trillion that Obama is rushing through. But I'm very pleased that you cooperated and helped out so I could still join you tonight beyond this very important issue. This is an issue that I've struggled with and worked with for many, many years because in medical school in the 1950s and 60s, the subject was never brought up until I had the unfortunate experiencing of seeing some nasty things as a resident. It made me very, very strong right to life. But one of the most interesting things that happened throughout my career in OBGYN, having delivered 4,000 babies, was the invention of the ultrasound. A friend of mine, a person who became a friend of mine, Bernard Nathanson, a man that was approximately my age, was breaking the law in the 1960s until he saw what he was doing with an ultrasound. So this was a tool that I was able to use very often. A woman would come in, she'd be pregnant, and talk about abortion. But it was very fortunate I'd have the ultrasound in the later years. In my early years, I didn't have the ultrasound. And it was an instrument that really told the patient and everybody exactly what they were doing. So there's no doubt in my mind about when life begins. For legal reasons, I'm liable. It's there. It's biological. And we have an obligation to protect all life.
Representative Paul, as personhood measures have been introduced into dozens of states, one of the most difficult legal challenges has been to describe the precise and earliest moment of when life begins. As the only physician in the presidential field and an OBGYN, how would you describe scientifically the moment life begins?
Well, it's a conception where you get into problems is biologically and legally, it's a difficult job to know when that moment occurs because there's no chemical test or an ultrasound test or any legal test. So there is a period of time that it's very difficult. Now, the way I address this, because we should resolve this, is that I have a bill in that defines the beginning of life at the time of conception. But I also say that those states that want to pass laws and work this out in their different manners, that the federal government can't overrule them, that the Supreme Court can't hear these cases. So I want to protect the rights of the states to make these definitions. But the medical legal question is, it's if you're dealing about 3 or 4 days, it is not that easy. I think it becomes a very moral issue at that time on making decisions on what one does.
Representative Paul, in 1965, the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists changed the definition of the word conception to mean implantation, and that is 7 to 14 days after the embryo is created. This change in definition was a significant policy change and conditioned the protection that would be extended to early human embryos. This change in definition has had a policy impact on scientific research, the legalization and prescription of abortifacient drugs and devices, and much more. Which definition of conception do you hold?
At the time of conception, when the egg and the sperm join together. You know, this reminds me of what they did with the Hippocratic Oath. When I graduated from medical school, they just dropped the Hippocratic Oath and the issue of abortion in the oath. But when my son Rand went to medical school, I went back, and they had a ceremony where they could voluntarily still take the Hippocratic Oath. So I was fascinated with this. What are they going to do about this? So they changed the Hippocratic Oath. Instead of saying that they wouldn't use an instrument of abortion, they said that they wouldn't do anything illegal, which meant that, you know, the abortion issue became relative and legalistic and not a moral issue at all. So changing the definitions is, you know, by an organization like the OBGYN organization won't change reality. And this is the reason that I belong to a pro-life OBGYN organization, because we were very frustrated with our national organization. And we have a large number of people that belong, but we were never able to control the votes at the national OBGYN organizations.
Representative Paul, given your well-known stance on the limited role of the federal government, what are the top 3 things that you would do as the federal government's chief executive to protect the rights of our unborn children and to stop abortions in our country?
Well, one of the very first things to do would be to stop all the funding, and I met with some frustrations with that, because there were many times I would introduce a resolution on overseas funding in particular, where it went to birth control. And too often there was a coalition, unfortunately, with some pro-life people and those others, and they would agree, well, as long as you send the money to for birth control, we'll allow you to put the amendment in to not use the money for abortion. And I didn't buy into that, because all these funds are fungible. So I have a bill that would deny all funding for birth control and for abortion. That is just criminal, to think that the government can take money from one group that vehemently opposes abortions and uses it for others. But I have another bill in that would have saved a lot of lives a lot sooner, and that's called We the People's Act. And this is saying that this get rid of the jurisdiction of the federal courts. So, and we can do it with just a majority vote. All we have to do is pass a bill by the House and the Senate and signed by the President that said if a state has a law, like was in Texas, that brought about Roe versus Wade, you wouldn't have to take it to the federal court. That could have been passed 10 years ago and saved millions of lives. And some of the pro-life people will say, well, that's not a good idea, because we want an absolute prohibition at the federal level, which is, you know, a goal. But you have to change the Supreme Court, or you have to change the Constitution. And I'm not against that. I support those desires. But in the meantime, I don't understand why we couldn't push this. As president, I would push this. I would ask the Congress to pass this law that says deny it to the Supreme Court and to the federal courts the jurisdiction over abortion.
Thank you. Representative Paul, you espouse a libertarian philosophy which, in effect, would leave abortion up to the states. If abortion is solely a states' rights issue, then how will we ever protect babies in states that are not pro-life?
Well, you have to do what the Right to Life movement is trying to do right now, is that we have to change the courts or change the Constitution. But my argument is you could do a lot more in the meantime. But you bring up the word libertarian, and I pride myself in being able to talk to a lot of people. Matter of fact, if you read my books on the abortion issue, the appeal there is to convert people. Because the Right to Life movement is very strong and they're very influential, and I'm with them and I work very hard, but I'm also trying to get people who make a claim. Matter of fact, there are some in the freedom movement who say, well, the old argument of violation of the woman's rights. But I'm in a position as a conservative constitutionalist who is a physician to talk to people, because one of the things that they take as a pledge is that they'll do no violence, and limiting a woman's choice is a violent act by not allowing them. But as a physician, I can talk to them and say, look, I'll show you on the ultrasound. I'll show you what they're doing. This is an act of violence. And this has helped me convert many, many people. So many have already told me this, that you made me think of this differently. And the books that I write now always has a chapter, on the right to life issue. So I think in the meantime, the best that we can do is to allow the removal of the jurisdiction. Just think what that does. It repeals Roe versus Wade immediately. And yes, there is the danger that some states won't confirm right away. But why give up on repealing Roe versus Wade if we can do it with a majority vote and a signature? An individual like myself in the presidency would be glad to sign something like that.
Two quick follow-ups. One, why do you think the pro-life movement has not coalesced behind the idea of limiting the appellate jurisdiction of the court? It doesn't have a lot of support in the pro-life movement.
I know, and I wish somebody would tell me why, because when the pro-life people come and they talk to me about the pro-life issues, I ask, but nobody seems to have an answer. I guess I can give you one answer that I have heard, and I think we just already heard it in the form of a question. It is not monolithic. It doesn't have a total prohibition, and therefore it doesn't stop everything in all 50 states. But if you stop things in 30 states immediately and you work on the rest, I don't understand, what's wrong with that. I think we should do that. So I think I'm in a position where I say, you do what you can in the meantime, but at the same time, don't give up on the other efforts.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, I'm sure you and everybody in this room remember the infamous contraception question that Stephanopoulos went on for about 15 minutes in New Hampshire. At the end of the question, you referred to the Fourth Amendment as allowing or safeguarding the right to privacy, which would include contraception. Why would the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, which mention the right to life, not apply just like the right to contraception?
Because I don't think anybody wants to give up their right of privacy. The Supreme Court, when they ruled on Roe versus Wade, the idea that they used the privacy issue really confused things, because if you gave up your right to privacy, you give up your right to your private schools, your homeschooling, your churches, and everything. The privacy is an important issue, but the whole thing is privacy isn't the issue here. The life is the issue. If you say privacy of the woman, that's one thing, but what about the privacy of your house? It's the fact that a fetus is a person is what counts. I think the privacy issue is too much of a red herring. So yes, the Constitution is explicit on privacy. That's the last thing we want to give up on, and this is what the Patriot Act does. It gives the right of government to use search warrants that aren't even written, that they can search us houses without search warrants. So to sacrifice our liberties would be, very, very bad. But you can protect life without sacrificing it. And I say it so often in my speeches, that we don't have to sacrifice liberty, any liberty to make ourselves safe. We don't have to sacrifice liberty to enforce laws against violence. And all the laws of violence were, indicated by our Constitution that this was supposed to be a state matter. We weren't supposed to have, state police officers coming in. But the privacy issue is something you certainly don't want to give up. You're going to give up too much if you want to say, well, this is not a privacy issue. But no, the whole thing is you're not going to be able to say on the states' rights issue or the Fourth Amendment that you can't sell birth control pills. I don't see that as very practical. Matter of fact, my opinion is we can't solve all these problems with the law. I went through this struggle in the 1960s, and the 60s was a radical period. That's when the drug culture started, the war was going on, the pornography came out, and the abortion issue came in. And the people changed, the morality changed, and this is what John Adams warned about. If the people are not moral and they are not religious, this society can't work. So it wasn't working in the 60s. Then the law was changed. The law was changed. So the loss of the morality caused us to get Roe versus Wade. So I argue the case that if you're going to get into real these details, we better think about our family life and our morality, because that is what will solve our problems more than finding out whether or not you can buy birth control pills or not.
Representative Paul. Representative. Earlier, you mentioned a way to protect children in states that might not protect against abortion, protect those unborn children by using a constitutional amendment. Would you support a constitutional amendment to protect unborn children?
I have in the past. I've signed it. The Jesse Helms constitutional amendment I was a supporter of. If it was written as his was written or close to it, I would be a supporter.
Representative Paul, in April of 2006, a part of the Massachusetts government-run healthcare law, Planned Parenthood secured the right to have a permanent representative on the Payment Policy Advisory Board. DeRoy Murdoch of the National Review noted that Governor Romney used his line-item powers to veto parts of the bill, such as the broader Medicaid dental benefits, but he neither rejected Planned Parenthood's place at the table nor insisted on including a pro-life representative. Would you use your appointment power as president to assure that pro-life advocates are represented in the federal government?
Oh, absolutely. If they're pro-liberty and believe in nonviolence, they're going to be pro-life. But under an administration that I would be head of, this wouldn't be a problem because they're not going to get any money. We shouldn't even have one penny going to Planned Parenthood, and then we wouldn't have to make these decisions at the state level.
Representative Paul, where do you think our past pro-life presidents may have failed to advance the pro-life agenda truly, and what would you do differently from them if elected?
Well, I think I've already stated that, because my frustration was that nobody would move along in the direction of removing the jurisdiction, which is a proper function of the federal government, and would repeal Roe versus Wade. And I'm not quite sure why we can't get it, but we've had pro-life presidents and we've had Republican conservative Congresses that generally voted pro-life. So I guess we'd have to ask each and every one of them, but I can't speak for them why they don't support it. But I've always worked on this, and I encourage people. I think it's a constitutional answer to a problem that we're not getting very far with, because the number of abortions are not decreasing, and the funding is still there. And now with Obamacare, all funds are fungible. So even if you take take away and say you can't do birth control and you can't do abortions. When you send money to a hospital, indirectly, they just shift the funds around. So this whole idea, once the federal government is involved, you have these funds. So this is why I don't like so much government involved in our medical care system.
Representative, this question is from Hannah from Boiling Springs, South Carolina, and she asks, how does your Christian faith in view of the Bible influence how you value life?
Well, you know, obviously, I understand very clearly where life comes from. It comes from a creator. It doesn't come from government, and neither do our rights come from government, and therefore the obligation of government is to protect life and liberty. But this is very clearly a biblical viewpoint. And you know, it's almost so bizarre in where we are in society today that even when I was in medical school, it wasn't a major issue. So I see society deteriorating rather rapidly. I think there's so little respect for life. I think we lose too much lives. I think we're way too careless in going into these unconstitutional wars. That's a lot of life lost too. A lot of young people get injured. So there's a lot of things that we can do to be pro-life. The Catholic Church, matter of fact, is pro-life even against the death penalty. And I've been very public on my repositioning on the national death penalty. There's been too many mistakes made by government. I don't trust the government. There's been too many mistakes proven wrong by the DNA. So we should be more cautious and pro-life when we're thinking about the death penalty as well.
Representative Paul, how would you approach foreign relations vis-a-vis China's one-child policy and other nations that disregard the right to life?
Well, you know, obviously we can't invade China to change their moral problems, but certainly we should not be sending them any money, and they still get a little bit of foreign aid from us, and we should, you know, try to set a good example. So when we're not pure on the abortion issue, it's pretty hard for us to lecture other countries. But there's one real strong argument, an intellectual argument on this. And some of the, you know, radical feminists who are real pro-abortion, we need to ask them more questions. Well, what do you think about the Chinese just aborting only female fetuses? You know, this doesn't make much sense either. They don't have an easy answer for that. Just as one time I brought a subject up like that, similar to on the View, when they want to pester me a lot about why I was pro-life, and I brought up this, you know, the whole idea, because their whole idea was the woman's body. I says, what about 1 minute before birth? I says, it's still the woman's body. Does that mean you can do an abortion, you know, when the woman's in the 9th month? And they threw up their hands and they said, oh, that's not what we're talking about. So we need to use China and these incidents to make our arguments much clearer to the people that we're trying to convert.
And as a follow-up to that, Ronald Reagan, in his second term as president, took the time to release his Emancipation Proclamation of the Unborn Child, in which he formally declared the, quote, unalienable personhood of every American from the moment of conception until natural death. Reagan then stated that I will take care that the Constitution and laws of the United States are faithfully executed for the protection of America's unborn children. As president, how would you communicate to the nation, especially those that may be on the fence about abortion, your commitment to protect America's unborn children?
Well, I think I have to, you know, restate a little bit of what I'm saying. First, you have to recognize the sanctity of life and the importance of it, and I do this, you know, from a medical or legal viewpoint and from a religious point of view. But then from a viewpoint of being a federal officer, a president, or a congressman, you want to be able to facilitate the ability of the states to protect life. And right now they're handicapped. They're hindered from it. They pass laws and they're rejected by the federal government. So this is why we don't want to become overly dependent on the federal government. We complain about the federal government all the time. We don't want Obamacare and all these other things, but all of a sudden we think, well, if they have control of it, it, they're going to protect it. But they ended up getting control in the courts, and they've done so much harm. So this is the reason I say the best protection that we can give is give the right of the states to protect life as they see fit.
Representative Paul, closing comments, 60 seconds.
Oh, well, I want to thank you very much for having me on. And of course, I think this is the key issue. I advocate, I'm the strong advocate for liberty, and everybody knows it. But liberty can't be protected if we don't protect life itself. And this to me is a moral issue as much as anything. I talked a little bit about that, about what happened in the 60s. And the laws so often reflect the people's culture. But we cannot change the people's morality by writing more laws. We can write more and more laws, but eventually we have to change the hearts and the minds of the people. We need stronger families, and we need more respect for life. Then the laws will respect that improved morality of the people.
Thank you, Representative Paul. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I want you to understand what a historic event this has been. We have never had a majority field of presidential candidates to take such a strong position on the sanctity of life. We are winning in the battle of public opinion, and we are winning hearts and minds across this nation. And it's because of people like you and candidates such as this that we continue to see the advancement of our issue. Please go to personhoodusa.com and sign the Personhood petition online. And we'd also like to ask you to go to your another website called govotesouthcarolina.com, where you can find your local polling place, and you will find a voter guide from Family Research Council on where the candidates stand on the issues. Thank you, and this concludes tonight's event.